Welcome to the Cross the Line podcast. My name is Carlos Smith, and I have another special guest with me today. She is the owner of Nika White Consulting, and today I have the pleasure of sitting with Dr. Nika White. How are you?
I'm well, Carlos. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking. I'm glad we finally were able to sit down. I know we had to keep rescheduling because we're so busy.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem at all. But starting out, can you tell us kind of like what is the concept of Nika White Consulting?
Sure. So Nika White Consulting is my management consulting firm, which I started back in 2017 at the beginning of the year. And it intersects the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership in business. So I travel all over the country, even have some international travel that I do for some of my clients. And I consult, train, and help organizations to think more intently about strategic diversity and inclusion in order to drive organizational performance and overall effectiveness.
And how did you actually figure out that this was your passion? Was it like, was it working like multiple different jobs and then something, what was it that made you figure out this was your passion?
Well, it's an interesting question, Carlos, because my background is not directly in this discipline of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This work, I like to say, found me. But when I was working in marketing communications, which is my primary background, I remember I was with an advertising agency, and I started thinking about how much I really enjoyed that industry. I thought I was going to be in that industry for the long haul. Marketing communications was something I was really passionate about. I love the fact that it was very dynamic, always on time, on pace. On strategy, on budget, very fast paced, but I really did appreciate that line of work. And I remember sitting in my office one day and I had an epiphany because I started to think about the fact that if I enjoy this career path so much, why aren't there others who look like me as an African American female that's also taking advantage of what I perceive to be a very rewarding career path? And when I started to really consider the fact that when you work for an advertising agency and you're in marketing communications, it's part of your duty and your charge to be smart marketing partners to the clients in which you're servicing. And considering that those clients, their audience, their consumers are diverse America, I knew that we needed to be also more forward thinking in our approach to diversity and inclusion. So I wanted to try to change that outcome. And I remember going to the president CEO of the agency I was working for at the time. He was very hands-on. I had a great rapport with him, and I shared a similar narrative that I'm sharing with you. And I knew at the time that the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal for the agency, was to become the most admired agency. And I also knew that I was in between New York office and the Greenville office. And whenever I would visit the New York office, I knew that the Attorney General was really focusing all of the efforts on trying to get those agencies within those large markets like Chicago and New York to think more intently about diversifying the workforce. And so they were knocking on the doors of those agencies saying, you have to diversify your workforce. This is not a suggestion, it's a mandate. We'll be back in 6 months to see how you're doing. Well, no one was thinking about Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I was employed at the time. But if we are going to be the leaders of this work, again, that was the BHAC, Most Admired Agency, I knew that we needed to start showing leadership in that regard. So I went to the president CEO, shared this narrative. He listened very intently and then proceeded to ask very thought-provoking questions, and we had really great dialogue. At the end of that conversation, he said, Nika, I agree, we're going to do it, you're going to lead it, now tell us how. And I was prepared for everything in that conversation with the exception of now tell us how. But I did know how to put really smart people in my camp that were already quite accomplished at doing this work in their respective organizations. And I realized at that time that all along, while I didn't know it, I was really drawn to this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so from there, it just created opportunities for me to be able to work full-time into this space.
Was there ever a moment of fear that you had when you were trying to figure out, like, it was time to do my own business?
Yeah, I think that fear is a natural, feeling for many people when you are transitioning to something that's different. Anything that requires change sometimes can require that anxiety or fear. For me, I was really driven by my passion for the work. I was driven by my curiosity and my confidence in my own ability. And again, as I mentioned before, not that I had the skill sets in that discipline, but I had the wherewithal to know how to immerse myself as a student of that industry, to become, really smart, really quick on the work, the importance of the work, how to execute it quite effectively. And I relied on a lot of, again, partners and mentors that were already very accomplished in that regard. And so I have a tendency to be one of those individuals that I'm quite driven, so I don't let fear keep me from really moving forward. I think sometimes that a little bit of fear can be healthy because it causes us to really make sure we're on our P's and Q's and that we execute at a high level. But, that's not to say that there weren't days where I felt like, am I doing this correctly? And so I'll share that there were times where we fumbled, but I was okay with that. My counterparts were okay with that because we were at least making progress. We were at least in the game. We were facilitating some level of activity that was leading towards best practices. And we soon found that people were knocking on our doors, but not for any kind of mandates, more so because they wanted to benchmark against what we were doing. So I was able to leverage that momentum and traction to keep me level-headed and not let the fear to really sink in to where it could have been to my detriment.
You just said how you and your team suffered some little humps and along the way.
Yeah.
What's the biggest thing that you take from setbacks from time?
I think that setbacks are necessary. In fact, sometimes I feel as though if I'm not making mistakes, that means I'm not stretching myself. And so that's really important for me. I never want to feel too comfortable because comfortable leads to complacency. And I think that we have to be willing to push ourselves and we have to be willing to set stretch goals and to step out of our comfort zone. And so I was not afraid to make those mistakes. I think that the only problem with mistakes is when you continue to make them and you don't grow and learn from them. And so for me, it was all about refinement. Once the mistakes were made, we would sit down, we would talk, we would think, what can we do differently to make sure that the outcomes the next time we will go to try to attempt this endeavor, we would be successful. And so that's part of life, it's part of growth, and it's a growth mindset that I was fortunate to be able to learn early on. And I certainly impart that knowledge to anyone that I find to be a part of my inner circle and my network.
One of my previous interviews with Mr. Ben Hall's Big Ben's Dessert, that was one of my favorite things that he said to me at the time, was that sometimes you miss out on your blessings if you just stay in your comfort zone. So you have to, challenge yourself and push yourself to do more. So what do you feel like was that opportunity for you? Was it a specific opportunity that you felt like was the one that opened up one door, they just continued to open up more and more doors for marketing, or was it a specific thing?
That's a great question, Carlos, and I will answer that from the perspective of, gravitating to this new discipline, this new career path that was vastly different from just marketing communications, because while that was where my start came in terms of, transitioning to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was in a dual role while I was working in the advertising agency. It did allow me to be able to gravitate towards other roles that were directly related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, for example, after doing that work for the agency that I was employed with at the time, maybe 5 or 6 years thereafter, I ended up getting the position of VP of Diversity and Inclusion for the Greenville Chamber. And that gave me a much broader platform to be able to do this work and gain greater exposure and visibility and work with a variety of clients and organizations, private, public sector. So we can't deny ourselves of the growth opportunities, and that requires us to see those opportunities as a blessing. I can tell you that when I transitioned to the chamber, that was a great learning opportunity for me because I'm a woman of faith, and I remember that I recognized that on paper the position was only funded for 3 years. It was a newly created position, so they were trying something. And I knew that the history of the organization was not such to where it was seen as being a staple for furthering the work of diversity, economic inclusion. And so I knew that my job was cut out for me. I was going to have to really rely on faith and, my ability to surround myself with, intelligent people that could help provide that level of support and technical assistance. And so that could have kept me from going after that position, but it was the best decision that I made. And they did a national search. I was the lucky beneficiary that was right in their backyard to assume the position. And honestly, it is precisely what led me to then launch my own management consulting firm, is because I saw that there was such a need for the work, and I was being called upon by many different organizations to help them facilitate the work within their respective organizations. And so we can't be afraid. We have to step out on faith. We have to make sure that we're doing all that we can to prepare ourselves for those opportunities. I will tell you that while I was in the midst of really learning my craft and the discipline of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I heavily invested in new knowledge, new tools, new resources to equip myself to be prepared for when that next opportunity would present itself. So for example, that's when I decided to go back and get my doctorate in management and organizational leadership, and that was a great alignment to this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I started writing books once I became much more well-versed on the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that opened up a lot of doors for me. So my point is, there are two main opportunities people have to keep in mind. The first is we can't be afraid. We have to step out. We have to have stretch goals. And then secondly, we must prepare ourselves. Faith without works is dead. So we must prepare ourselves for when that opportunity will come. And so that's what benefited me.
Speaking of opportunities, I know so you and your husband, you also have a foundation. Can you talk a little bit about your foundation?
Sure, yes. So my husband of almost 22 years, he's also a business owner, and so I like to say that we are equally yoked from a standpoint of really being driven and ambitious about our business endeavors, our careers, and about being community advocates and really community outreach. And so earlier this year, we launched Nika White Foundation, and there's several different principles that align with our interest of where we want to provide financial support and lend our skill sets and our talent to help further different efforts in the community. One of which is entrepreneurship, particularly as it relates to helping minorities to advance within the entrepreneur world. And so as entrepreneurs ourselves, we have provided grants, so far totaling over $11,000 to business startups that are minority owned, and even conducted an entrepreneur leadership seminar whereby we're helping businesses to grow and thrive, learn how to transition from working in their business to on their business, allowing them to grow, compete effectively in the marketplace, and create jobs. And that's a passion area for us. We also are real big on education, and so we've aligned our efforts through the foundation with Legacy Early College, and through a program called LIT, which stands for Leadership and Training. And it's a group of African American men who are really trying to find their way. They're trying to beat the odds, and in spite of what people say their outcome is going to be, they have great support through the school system, and we wanted to be a part of that. And so this leadership training opportunity is something that we're closely connected to. We also provide scholarships. We're going to be giving out $5,000 in scholarships through our partnership with the Urban League of the Upstate in January as part of the MLK weekend. We have partnered with Phyllis Wheatley to help them to provide better accommodations within their space, whereby they are trying to establish an incubator for business owners, particularly minority business owners. And again, since that's in alignment with our area of interest, we have provided resources to help them be able to outfit that space accordingly, and a number of other things that we have on the horizon. But our goal is to give back. At the center of all of our efforts, Christ is right there, so we are really guided by Christ, commerce, and community.
I certainly have some education questions that I want to ask, but I don't want to stick to the foundation for a second.
Sure.
As far as your foundation, how do you know when you talk about funding minority business, what do you look for when you want to fund a business?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And we have a really robust process that we have implemented with the first round of grants that we have been able to award. And it's through an application process. And through that process, we ask questions about their business. We want to know their business vision and mission. We want to understand more about their own personal commitment to investing in themselves and their business, because that's important to us. If we're going to invest in you, we want to know that you're also making the investment in yourself. We are interested in the type of business, and so we want to know, is it something that has room to, again, create jobs for people and to grow and to thrive? So is there really a need for it in the community? And through those efforts, it gives us an opportunity to really glean the level of profitability, the potential that the company has. We also sit down one-on-one. We have a selection committee of others that join forces with us. And so the group collectively, we sit down with those candidates one-on-one for an interview. We do a deeper dive to understand what their challenges are, what their barriers are. it's important to us to not only make a selection to be able to give financial support to, but equally important what we're looking for. Do we have some resources by the way of human capital or organizations that can help also those businesses with their growth goals? And that tends to have certainly a consideration set when we're determining which organizations to award.
And when you fund them the money, do you still try to stay hands-on with the business to make sure they're doing what they're doing, or do you let them?
No, absolutely. And so, we ask, what do you plan to do with these dollars? How is it going to help take your business to the next level? And the answer to that is really important to us, because if it's something that we feel as though whatever the funding amount that we can provide is not really going to help position them and propel them to the next level, then, we have to think intently about, is this really going to be the impact that we're seeking? And so, but yes, our goal is to not just provide one and done type of investment, then walk away. Our goal is to treat that as an opportunity to build relationships, to stay in close contact with them, to leverage, again, whatever type of knowledge base my husband and I have and the resources that are within our network to help them to propel themselves to the next level. And so that is a very significant part of the decision-making process.
You say you and your husband are both entrepreneurs. When did you guys both realize were y'all entrepreneurs before y'all met, or did y'all come together and then finally say, you know what, entrepreneurship is like the way for us?
Well, so I always say that my husband has been the inspiration for me to launch out on my own as an entrepreneur. He is what I refer to as a serial entrepreneur. He has successfully grown a number of businesses, even to the point where his most recent business, he grew it to a point where he was able to sell it and then capitalize on, the dollars from that sell to then start a new business venture, which is doing incredibly well right now. And so we have what we refer to as White Holdings, and under White Holdings we have a number of business ventures, and one of which would be my husband's trucking, transportation, logistics company. And of course my consulting firm falls under White Holdings. We also have a division of White Holdings where we invest in a lot of real estate. We have some Airbnb properties. We have some properties that we rent out. We have a lot of properties that we may go in and then refurbish, renovate, and then flip. So we really believe in multiple streams of income. The business that my husband was able to sell was an insurance business, and so he ran that for several years. And so, we have the experience of not being afraid to go after entrepreneur endeavors and to see them grow and thrive. And so when I say that he was my inspiration, I always kind of saw myself continuing to be in corporate America, working in that capacity. I was very comfortable. And again, going back to, we have to step out of our comfort zone. I remember once I started working specifically in the discipline of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I was getting tapped, left and right by people to just want to pick my brain or want to, pay me to come in and consult with them. I realized that this is a potential opportunity to turn into a business. And I mentioned that I worked for several years at the Greenville Chamber, and part of my role and function there was to help facilitate initiatives that would help foster economic inclusion, particularly for minority businesses. And so in that regard, I was around entrepreneurs all the time. And so I guess you can say I caught the entrepreneur bug by being in the presence of all of those companies, then also being married to someone that was really already devoted to entrepreneurship and had great success in that regard.
Who would you say were some of your mentors, because you were so well-rounded and you're very educated? Who would you say were some of your mentors that helped you learn soak up everything that you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm really big on mentorships, and not only just seeking mentors and having mentors to help you professionally and personally grow, but also being able to pay it forward by serving as a mentor to others. And so I am, again, just a big advocate of mentorships. And so a lot of my mentors have been, they've run across several different demographics. One of the things that I tell people all the time is that it's not a good idea just to have one singular mentor, because that puts a lot of pressure on one person, because the reality is that we should have mentors for different areas of our lives, and not expecting just one person to be able to be that model for who you want to emulate in every area of your life. And so, for example, I have a mentor that really keeps me grounded spiritually. I have several mentors that are actually in the same discipline that I'm in, that are much more advanced in their experience and working directly in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion that I call on at different times. I have, mentors for a lot of the boards of directors that I serve on, particularly the boards that maybe I am relatively new to. There's some that are more seasoned, and they have, provided me with a great deal of insight to help me ensure that I'm being an effective board member. And so, generally speaking, it just really depends on what I'm looking for. And I always encourage people to do the same thing. Just make sure you're very intentional about building that relationship so that the person understands what is it you're seeking to grow and to learn from, that they may be able to help impart into you.
With mentors, this is kind of a two-part question. A, do you think it's a such thing as having too many mentors? And then B, are you ever too old to have a mentor?
So let me answer the latter question first. No, I don't think that anyone is ever too old to have a mentor. And one of the things that I tell people is that, again, you don't want to just seek a mentor that may be in the same ethnicity or race that you're in. You want to seek mentors that are of different genders, that are different race, ethnicities, different even disciplines. Sometimes the tendency is to gravitate to people who are already directly in the work that you're doing. And sometimes that can be beneficial, but sometimes it's also important to seek out people that may have other perspectives and other experience that can help to round you out. And so you're never too old to seek out mentors. I think that it's a two-way rewarding relationship. And the other question is, can you have too many? You know, I think the answer to that is it really depends. It depends on what you seek from that particular mentor relationship. You know, I have some mentees that I maybe only talk to, I would say, maybe 6 times a year. And the nature of that relationship is that, you know, they aspire to hone their skill sets in an area that I have a lot of experience in, and so they kind of use me as a sounding board when they need me, and they know to call on me. And then in those particular situations, we will certainly have a lot of banter, and I will, you know, ask some thought-provoking questions to get them to start thinking intently about other areas. Because, you know, your job as a mentor is not to tell people what to do, it's to give them perspective, to give them resources that can help them to ensure that they're thinking about it in a very holistic way, and then to help support them so that way they are led to conclusions on their own about what they should do. And so again, that's why I say it's really it depends type of answer in terms of how many,
Right.
because some of us may have different, you know, goals, and you may want to align your mentor relationships with those different goals that you have. And sometimes it could be a personal goal, it could be a professional goal, and sometimes it's natural for people within our workplaces to automatically kind of serve as that mentor to us or that sponsor to us.
Right.
So it really depends.
As an entrepreneur, African American female entrepreneur, did you feel like your success, it was harder for you to climb up that ladder for success as a female entrepreneur?
Yeah, I can definitely see how for many females, and particular minority females, the difficulty that could be present and when you're trying to propel yourself to the next level. And certainly I have, you know, experienced some barriers, but I think that what has helped me tremendously is that I have always been the type of person, and a lot of this has to do with the values that were placed upon me from, you know, my parents growing up, you know, to truly believe that nothing was impossible. And again, when you are a person of great faith, you don't allow those obstacles to keep you from really charting a pathway of success. And so if you end up finding that there's an obstacle in front of you, you find a way to work around it. You become very resourceful. You become very resilient to understand that sometimes a door is being closed for a reason. Maybe there's another door that's more appropriate for you that God's going to open up later down the road. But nonetheless, you just keep trying. You keep putting forth your best effort. You keep elevating excellence, and you keep representing yourself quite well. And then I have found that strategy leads to opportunities, you know, in and of itself. You know, for example, I will be celebrating 2 years with my business in February of 2018. Oh, actually February of 2019. And so when I think about the fact that I'm not even at the 2-year mark, and I am blessed to where I can be very selective with the clients and the opportunities that I say yes and I say no to. And I think that that's a testament to the favor that God has placed on my life, but also the ability that He has given me to know my craft well, to be a student of my industry, and to really want to deliver high quality services to clients that leads to impact. And I think that once you have that mindset and you govern yourself accordingly, that regardless of your background, who you are, being female, being minority, etc., it certainly opens up opportunities for you to realize the fruit of your labor.
Do you feel like women in general, overall though, they get overlooked for opportunities?
Oh, absolutely they do. I think that we still live in a society to where there are a lot of career paths that are heavily dominated by men, and they are not seen as quite friendly to women.
Mm-hmm.
You know, tech, and you hear a lot about STEM these days, particularly trying to really diversify career fields in technology and that sort of thing. And so I think that the propensity is still there for people to not have gender parity, but I think that if we aren't careful as women, particularly as minority women, that we can fall into the trap of believing that that's so, and maybe succumb to the victim mentality versus continuing to try to drive ourselves towards greater opportunities. And so I try not to let that get in my way. I'm a realist, and so I understand that it's there, especially as someone that does the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I see it every day. I teach about it every day. I consult about it every day. But personally, for my life, I have just not allowed that to be a tremendous factor to what I can give and what I can offer. And I always see it as an opportunity to just overcompensate, where sometimes some of those things can create a barrier, just overcompensate and do what I can, control what I can. I can't control other people, but I can control my reaction to other people.
I don't want to get too political or anything, but, under this presidency of President Trump, a lot of things have come about, and things like the Me Too movement and different things like that. Do you feel like now with him in office, it kind of help bring more light to women and bring that out more because some of the things he says? And another point was, I can't remember, I was listening to a podcast, and they felt like that, excuse me, that if Hillary would have gotten into office and would have won, it would have just been like she was just a symbol of women empowerment, but maybe things may not have gotten done. But since President Trump is in office now, and some of the things that he's saying, and how it's just heightened the sensitivity of a lot of different things, that it's kind of helped with bring a spotlight to how women are being, discriminated against and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not going to begin to speculate on, whose ever leadership would have or would not have led us to a different position that we're in right now. I mean, I will say that I don't think that one singular person has the complete power to change mindsets, behaviors, and culture of our society in general, but I will say that a lot of the positions that Trump has taken, I think that it's given greater power and greater momentum to people like myself who are in this discipline of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it drives us to want to bring greater emphasis to the work and the need for the work and the importance of the work. And so I try to focus on that. I definitely believe that our leaders have a great deal of responsibility to help facilitate inclusion and make sure that everyone feels like they have an opportunity for success. And there have been opportunities where I feel like I have personally been disappointed at the missed opportunities to really help facilitate that by our current leader. But when that happens, I think it just yields a greater opportunity for each of us to dig our heels into the ground and say, well, what can we do to make a difference, And that's why I always say I don't think it's up to one singular person to try to change the outcome. It's up to all of us to do what we can within the sphere of influence that we have to make a difference. And so that's what I really focus a lot of my attention on.
Do you feel more obligated? Of course, you say you like to help minorities, but especially, do you feel obligated to kind of help women?
I'm all about advancing women and empowering women and equipping women. A lot of the times when I do speaking engagements, most often, it can be to women audiences, and so that is an area that I'm very passionate about. As a female myself, I have a daughter who's a freshman in college, and I want every opportunity that she desires to be within her reach. And so I will always be an advocate of the underrepresented in general. And so that certainly includes women in a lot of spaces, and it most definitely includes people of color.
Earlier this year, I had a sit down with about 12 women, and they had a My Black is Beautiful movement in downtown Spartanburg, and they were just talking about the adversities that Black women, face in society today. And one of the things that we talked about was the Me Too movement.
Sure.
I don't want to sound insensitive or anything. And one of the things that I asked them was, do you feel like with the Me Too movement that we could potentially be heading down a slippery slope? And what I mean by that is, one person can come out and say that, hey, you did something to them, and then it's just like more and more people just pile on. Or do you feel like that could kind of make us head down a slippery slope to where even if it's not true, but people are just piling on, that it just makes you look guilty?
Yeah, well, I think that at any given time when you have a population of people who feel more comfortable to express situations that they've been exposed to that highlights negativity for others, then there's certainly that risk involved, but that doesn't exonerate us of the responsibility to give that person the benefit of the doubt and facilitate the due diligence to do the proper investigation and the research to make sure that the facts come to the surface. And so I applaud all of the women that have worked very diligently and been a voice for those who may not have felt quite as comfortable stepping forward. And I think that we need more of that. Quite honestly, I've heard someone say before that these things have, it's not that they're getting more and more prevalent, it's just that people are more and more comfortable talking about them because of those brave souls who have stepped forward. And so I don't worry about the slippery slope type of, potential downfall, because I see it as just greater responsibility on all of our part to really give it the attention that it deserves.
Why do you feel like some women and people who were sexually harassed in the workplace, why do you feel like they may not have spoken up in the past?
I think it's a lot of different reasons. I think a lot of it may have to do with the person that perhaps they were victimized by, the perpetrator. We're finding that a lot of these individuals are in very powerful positions within their organizations, and who would want to put themselves in a predicament where they are risking their jobs, who want to put themselves in a predicament to where they're risking whether or not people will believe them, just because maybe they don't have the same stature and the same type of position or title as those people in power. I think that has a huge deal to do with it. I think that sometimes there's a lot of internalized guilt because we live in a society to where, whether it's intentional or unintentional, when those situations occur, it causes women to question themselves. Could I have done something differently? And the bottom line is that that becomes irrelevant from my vantage point. I think that a no is no and respect is respect, and we have to make sure that we're not crossing the line or creating some gray area where people may seem as though, regardless of what maybe someone may wear or their personality, whatever the case may be, it's never appropriate for someone to infringe upon the space and the safety and the comfort of anyone else. And so I think there are some legitimate reasons why some women have decided to be silent. And I think that what the Me Too movement has done is it's brought about greater level of comfort in speaking up. And even though some people may question, a lot of time has passed, why this is years ago, why are you just now bringing it forward? We have to give people the benefit of the doubt. We're not necessarily always in their shoes to know what they were thinking when it occurred and why they made the decisions that they made. But I truly believe that every particular situation deserves the due diligence of proper investigation. And that's really for both sides. I say that not to only, express that the benefit of the doubt should always be given to the women only. I think that, there are some people who may not have correct or proper intentions, and maybe they are trying to jump on, a bandwagon that gets them some type of attention that maybe that they're seeking. And so I think that it protects both the men and the women when situations are brought to the surface that require some type of investigation to occur, for that investigation to occur in a way with full diligence.
And it still seems like at times, though, even if you prove innocent in a situation, just having that attached to your name where, such and such may have gotten caught up in a situation in the past and then he was later proven innocent, it still sticks with you, and sometimes
It does. One of the things that I often say when I'm facilitating talks is that, we have to be much more willing as a society to extend grace and accept grace. Because, unless we were in someone's shoes, we don't know what we would do or how we would respond. And I feel like every circumstance is very circumstantial, and without all the facts in hand, it's hard for us to say what we would do. And so I think that we need to become much more sensitized to the need to extend grace and accept grace and assume positive intent. Because it's like you said, it's hard. There have been many people who have been exonerated from some of the alleged, behaviors or charges that have been brought against them. And, their reputation is now stained by that. And that's also unfair. And so I'm very sensitized to the consequences on both sides, and that's why I brought up the importance of the due diligence and the full investigative process, so that the truth can eventually come out, and people can stop perceiving others in a way that may not be fair based upon the facts.
Absolutely. I want to talk about one of your articles that you wrote. I thought was really interesting, the equality and equity article. And you were saying that equality, everyone has access to the same thing, and equity is everyone has access to what they need to be successful.
Yeah.
Do you feel like everyone has the same opportunity?
No, absolutely they don't. You know, and it relates a lot to this overarching conversation around privilege, as well as to the conversation of where does equity sit in the equation of inclusion. And the reason that I speak to it a lot, so much so to where I've written white papers and written articles about it, as you've referenced, is because I find that if we don't intersect the notion of equity to the conversation of inclusion, then we tend to be misguided, and we are not really hitting the mark in terms of the solutions and the initiatives that we want to implement in order to help foster greater inclusion. And what I mean by that is we live in a society where we're so conditioned by being fair. You know, we've grown up as kids to where fairness is what you need to accept, right? Everything needs to be fair. And I have 2 kids, and they're very close in age. And I remember as kids, if you give one something, the other one is then looking for the same thing. And my husband and I, from a parenting perspective, we always kind of govern ourselves from the standpoint that each child is different. So what we may set and regulate and decide for one child may not necessarily be the same for the other child, and we always felt that was the proper way. I don't think that as a society we always consider that aspect when we're just dealing with people in general, especially as it relates to the workplace or just in societal systems that exist. You know, as you referenced that I put in my article, you know, equality is when we give everybody the same thing. And the assumption is that when you give everybody the same thing, that everybody has the opportunity to be successful. Well, the challenge with that is everyone does not start at the same place.
Absolutely. And
some people are privileged to where there are things that has nothing at all to do with them that has allowed them to get maybe a couple steps ahead of others. And so if we're not all starting at the same place, but yet and still our objective is success for everyone, then we have to give people what they need and not just what everyone else is getting, to help bridge the gap and to help make sure that there's greater opportunity of success for everyone. And one of the examples that I always like to give would be thinking about higher learning institutions and how in which they may have first-generation college student programs. And they do that very intentionally because when they define success is all about their graduation rates. They want all of their students to matriculate through their institutions being quite successful, and that means they're going to graduate and then hopefully be able to go on to apply their education to all types of industries and careers. And so when a student is first gen, they don't necessarily have a parent or older sibling to go to help ask questions like, how do I navigate this particular situation as part of my college career? You know, how do I have the appropriate study skills? They don't have that go-to resource within their inner circle to be able to ask those questions of. And in organizations, higher learning institutions, they recognize that. And by research, it states that a lot of those first-gen students are the ones who find themselves not being able to complete their education because either they will find it too difficult, too many barriers, not know how to navigate their college career, and so they will end up dropping out. And sometimes, you know, when you call home, those first-gen students, instead of being met with, oh, well, it's okay, you know, dig deep and find that grit and that resiliency, get back in there and try again, tomorrow will be a better day. Sometimes they're met with information that's, well, you know, come on home, it's fine, get a job, no big deal. And it's because, again, those parents and those older siblings, they have not had a different experience.
Exactly.
And so those higher learning institutions, they recognize that, and so they'll put forth special programming, whether it's, you know, special scholarships or technical support and assistance, mentors and coaches to help those first-gen students to be successful. So that's just an example of how having a lens of equity can help provide greater opportunities for those that may not otherwise be able to matriculate towards success naturally.
Do you feel like education nowadays is just enough though? Because like you were saying, everybody doesn't start the race at the same place. But at times, you know, 2 people can have a degree, but a lot of times you may not get out. You may be more qualified than somebody, but just because the employer feels more comfortable with the other person, then they'll give it to the other
Right.
person.
So I call that bias. It's strictly unconscious bias, implicit bias, whatever you like, however you like to refer to it. But it's dangerous and it's toxic, and it certainly does breed situations where people that are deserving of consideration sets may not even be in the consideration set. And so we have to break down a lot of that bias. We have to help disrupt that bias and allow people to understand how they can become more consciously inclusive versus, to just be driven by the fact that, as human beings, we all have propensity to be biased. And I do recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something to feel as though now it makes me a bad person, but you do want to be knowledgeable about it, and you do want to acknowledge the fact that we do have the ability for bias to creep up into our decision-making ability, into our interactions with others. But that's not enough to just say that we have it. We have to try to also find ways to equip ourselves with skill sets to become more mindful of when it does occur. How can we ensure that it's not to the detriment of someone else?
But how do we break that barrier? Because I remember when I was working for, when I was writing for Black Sports Online, and one of our articles that came out, it was a guy came on. He was another journalist for another company. He was talking about how his manager that was doing the hiring process was just like going through applications, and if he saw that you were like an African American or somebody of color, he would just automatically just throw your application away. So it's like, how do we kind of break that barrier?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. The first thing I would repeat again, I think that it has a lot to do with training and skill set building that can help people to first and foremost recognize their propensity for bias to creep into their decision making, and then secondly, equipping them to have the skill sets to know how to disrupt that unconscious bias. And I do a lot of sessions and training on that with many of my clients, and a lot of it has to do with becoming more mindful. If you practice greater situational awareness and greater mindfulness, then you're able to notice when bias is occurring, because that's why it's dangerous. It's called unconscious for a reason, because we don't even know that it's occurring. And so what we have to do is train ourselves to become much more mindful and aware of our situation. And then once we are aware, that gives us greater ability to be able to potentially change the outcome, to question, where do we have these views? Where are they coming from? To trace it back to the point of origination. I always use the example when I'm training that, imagine, if you will, that all of us has this invisible record inside of us, and everything that we've been exposed to since day one, since birth, is being stored on that record. And that record is not just accurate information, but it's also inaccurate information, like stereotypes and assumptions that we have. Either maybe we have them because we have experienced them for ourselves, or perhaps they have been things we've heard from the media, or maybe there have been people within our family or institutions we've been a part of that have had sentiments that have been negative about certain groups of people and identities. And that's been stored. It doesn't mean that we necessarily explicitly endorse those things or even believe them, but they're there and they can surface at any given time. And so just being aware of really how unconscious bias works, I think gives us greater ability to notice when it's occurring, and we can help try to disrupt that.
It kind of this just made me think about something, with stereotypes. A lot of times, I came up in sports, doing sports broadcasting, so a lot of times, I'm heavy on sports, so when a lot of times they show like star players on teams, they'll show how they came up, ESPN will do a special how they came up, a broken home or one parent, or in different things like that. Do you feel like those kind of things play into the fact of how they see, like, at times African Americans, people of color?
Well, I think it does, but I have actually two different schools of thought about it. I think on one hand, someone could question, why do all of those stories have to be about the person being broke, busted, and disgusted to finally reach this level of fame? Or, but I think that what it shows is just the reality of so many people of color in particular have to persevere. Not to say that others that are part of the majority group don't have to experience certain shortcomings in their lives that causes them to have to really dig deep to find that grit and that resiliency, but we tend to see it more so with people of color, particularly those that have come from backgrounds where they could have been a product of their environment, but they have had people in their circle that have supported them and helped them to get to a level of success. And so I think that is the reality of of the stories and the narratives that are out there about many people. But I also love the fact that it has this incredible way of just demonstrating that no matter where you come from, no matter what your background or your circumstances, ultimately at the end of the day, it is up to each of us to try to find a way to fight through that and to change that narrative for others. And so, yeah.
Should the lack of education, hinder people from those opportunities or those athletes at times? Do you feel like?
I think education is so important. So I am of the belief that if we can change the way in which society places value on education in terms of who get the experiences, who gets to be a part of those schools that are well resourced and that have the best teachers. I think that those decisions create a huge opportunity for us to become even more diligent about helping our young people to track a pathway of success, particularly those that find themselves in Title I schools. Because I think that those are the schools that oftentimes are not quite as well resourced, and they are not quite as innovative in their approach to try to meet those kids where they are, helping to bridge the gap. You can't just focus on the four walls of that school classroom in terms of just the academics. You have to think holistically about what's going on at home that could be providing this barrier from that particular student being able to show up at their best at school. And so there are a lot of different things that we have to consider. And it reminds me of On Track, which is the program that the United Way of Greenville County has been greatly responsible for with a number of other partners. But, they really take a holistic approach, and they put in place intervention strategies because they recognize that those Title I schools in which they're focused on, it has nothing to do just with the time that they're at school, but also what happens when the student is released back into the home.
Right.
And so I think that we have to become much more innovative and creative in solving the problems holistically in order to see greater outcomes.
And I feel like school, I think it's great. You need your education, but it's, at the same time, I feel like they don't at times prepare us for the real world and some of the things that's to come after school. Like it teaches you. In one of the books I reference is Rich Dad Poor Dad.
I love that book.
Yeah,
yes.
I love the book. Yeah, and he was just saying, school really teaches you in a way, in a sense, to just go to school and make good grades and be a good employer. But it doesn't teach you like real life skills when things go wrong. It just feels like, to me, I feel like at times we may be shortchanged by the education system. It needs to be fixed.
Yeah, no, Carlos, I think you're right. And I think that there are a lot of entities that are starting to realize that, and they're starting to be more intentional about how do we bridge that gap. One of the things that I know that the Greenville Chamber does quite effectively is they are pretty great about convening the business community with the education sector and having the two to talk about what are you seeing that's not being met by the education system that employers are looking for, and then vice versa. And it really helps to bring about greater partnerships. We have seen that a lot of the educators are starting to think more intently about how do we help those students to build their soft skills, because those are equally important. And even how do we start to reframe the conversations where we're not just speaking of furthering your education from getting a 4-year degree, but maybe it's a technical degree, because those are high paying jobs as well. And not everyone is necessarily destined to go to college, and it doesn't make them a person that has less potential to be successful. It just means that their pathway is different. There are a lot of people these days to where entrepreneurship could be something that they could excel in, and so are we presenting that as an option to our young people?
I think we should.
Yeah, I
absolutely,
really absolutely, yeah.
Because me and my friends, we talk all the time, and I said in some other interviews about education. For me, at times I think I don't know if I had my degree from USC Upstate, and I don't know at times if I had to do it all over again, I don't know if I would go back and do it again, because it's just the debt that it puts you in, and it's just like it's hard to they say you'll make so much more than the average person who doesn't go to get a degree, but it's like the debt that you had to go through to pay all these bills.
You're right. That's a big conversation that keeps surfacing, and in fact there are a lot of tech companies in general that have gravitated from even requiring a 4-year college degree. So one of the things that has become important to me, and I mentioned early on that through our foundation we do work with Legacy Charter School and through this LIT program, Leaders in Training. And their motto is they want to make sure that students do matriculate to college, and I think that's important. But I think it's important
important from the standpoint of they need to know that that is within reach for them. They can attain that. But if they also decide, you know what, even though college is within reach for me, if I have this other very solid plan where I'm going to follow this other pathway, where maybe I get a technical degree, or I will take up a trade, and then I allow that knowledge base to then allow me to establish maybe a business. I mean, there's multiple ways to be successful. And I think that where sometimes it's a missed opportunity is if we don't allow our young people to know that there are multiple ways in which to be successful.
One of Mr. Willis Forts, he works over at the Sunshine House Academy, and also he's a professor. And we had two different ideas. He said that he felt like, one of the things he probably would have done differently if he didn't have a full scholarship to play football was, maybe go to like a 2-year school, and that way, and then go on to get his degree at a 4-year school. But I felt like, for me, I was like, I would tell people, if school is not for everybody, that's for one thing. But I feel like, you should just kind of after school, high school, if you don't know what you want to do, go to work for a couple of years and kind of get a feel for what you want to do. And then once you figure out what you really want to do, then you go to college. Because if you just jump right in, it's like you're just wasting time and money. And for me, when I went to college, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do until like my senior year when I started doing the broadcast. I mean, I always loved sports, but I was information management, so I was dealing with computers. And when people asked me why did I want to do, I just said I just did it for money. And that was the wrong reason. So
you hear a lot about those who go into engineering as well, knowing that maybe their strong suit is not into those engineering classes, and maybe they're doing poorly, and it's like it's okay to switch your major. Not everybody has to be an engineer per se. There's so many different careers out there that could be very fruitful for people that they don't even consider because it's not something they've been exposed to. And so you're right. Sometimes we have to make sure that we are communicating the need for young people to start early, being exposed to so many different career paths and different options so that they can become more informed about how in which they want to chart their pathway.
And that's actually something I'm in the process of writing my own book where I talk about a lot of these different things. And I said that for me, I feel like in certain ways that we kind of put a lot of pressure on young kids. It's hard to ask a 17, 18-year-old what they want to do for the rest of their life because as adults, we change our careers all the time. So it's just like we can't really put that much pressure on a kid to figure out what they want to do at such a young age. I just feel like we need to.
You're right. And there's a lot of people now that are, doing things like a gap year, from high school to before they decide whether to go to college, whether to start working immediately. And, but that's even a privilege in and of itself. Some people can't do the gap year, And so I think about my husband, for example. He's a graduate of Clemson University, but he went through the Air Force ROTC program. And so he did his 4 years. They paid for his college. And once he graduated, he then enrolled in the Air Force as an officer. He served his time for 4 years. It gave us a tremendous start. And then, we dabbled into other things from there. But everyone's pathway is different, and that's okay. And I think that we have to make sure that our young people recognize that there's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's what fits your situation the best.
Absolutely. Just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
What is the biggest sacrifice that you've had to make so far to get to where you are?
So I'm a mom of 2. I'm a wife of 22 years. And when I decided to go back to school to pursue my doctorate degree, I was working full time. I was a mom of 2. I was a wife. I was still heavily involved in the community in many different capacities. That was a big time commitment. And it was a sacrifice that not only I had to make, my entire family had to make it, But it was something that we all did together. It wasn't always easy. It was, more about the journey and the perseverance than anything. But I was very strategic, and I knew that it was part of the process for me to establish myself as a thought leader in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the benefits of organizational leadership and management. And so it was a very calculated decision, and that was a big sacrifice. There were times that I certainly thought to myself, is this worth it? And then I thought about my children, and I thought, do I want them seeing mom quit? Do I want them, seeing mom complain about something that, quite honestly, was a blessing in disguise? I just didn't feel it necessarily at the moment because I was in the trenches of trying to get the work done and get my dissertation defended and, all of the research, and it was a lot. But I feel like nothing worth having comes without a sacrifice, and so I was um, I was proud to have been done with that process, but even more proud to say that I endured the process. It was more about the endurance than it was about the degree itself.
When you look back at everything that you've accomplished and everything you went through, what would you tell your younger self if you had to do something different? What would you tell your younger self to do differently?
Enjoy the process more. I
Mm-hmm.
think that we spend so much time trying to get through the process that we don't take the time to really appreciate what the process is teaching us,
Absolutely.
what the process is doing to help grow us. We just want to get through it. And, that's a hard balance because while you're in the process, you're dealing with, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes if the process is not something that is easy, it's more so the hard parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
But enjoy the process. Don't try to rush it so much to where you miss out on all of those teachable moments and all of those small lessons that sometimes are maybe hidden. So enjoy the process,
Right.
enjoy the journey.
What characteristics do you think entrepreneurs need to have to be
Yeah.
successful?
Well, you've heard me mention the words grit and resiliency time and time again. That's first and foremost. I think another thing is confidence. You have to be confident, and not so much in your ability to get it right, but your ability to endure the process. Entrepreneurship is hard. It is
Mm-hmm.
hard. And you also have to be willing to endure feelings of isolation. So you need to kind of surround yourself with a tribe of people that understand what you're going through,
Mm-hmm.
that can empathize with, the journey that you're on, and that can provide some level of support because it's not so to where you always can go to your employees and talk about your challenges because you don't want them to fear that, okay, am I going to close my doors any day now?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that is a reality of what you're facing. Am I going to be able to make payroll? Am I going to be able to, continue to have the capacity to scale appropriately and to meet the needs and demands of our clients and our customers that we're servicing? And all of those things can be really, really hard. I tell people that just because you're good at your craft and your trade, that may give you the passion for entrepreneurship, but it may not give you the business acumen to be able to know how to grow your business and take it to the next level. And so it is hard work,
Mm-hmm.
and it is not for the faint of heart. It's not for someone who's looking for success overnight. And you certainly sacrifice a lot as an entrepreneur. So a lot of solid planning is really important, but it's also a lot about the psyche too, just getting your
Mm-hmm.
mind ready to know that you're going to have rough days and hard days,
Absolutely.
but you stay at it.
I like to ask everybody that comes on to the podcast, what is your blueprint for success?
um, Faith first and foremost. Being very intentional. I think that there's so much power in intentionality. The title of my first book that I authored is Intentional Inclusionists, and it really deals with the premise of the work of inclusion and diversity does not happen organically. We have to be intentional, but that applies to anything that we do in life. So that's part of my blueprint. You have to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a certain look about it. It means you're being very calculated, you're being very strategic, you are exercising forethought, you are imagining, envisioning the end result, you are tracking, and you're putting intervention strategies in place if you see that you are off track from where you need to be. But it's all about this due diligence in the planning process. And it's, I mentioned confidence before. It's all about being confident in yourself. Um, you know, I can potentially bet on a lot of people and a lot of things, but where I feel my most confident is when I'm betting on myself because I know myself, and so that has been the blueprint of success. Having people in your corner. No one gets to success on their own. People always have to have people in their corner to help push them, encourage them, and just the wherewithal to keep going no matter what.
It's my final two questions. The first one is, well, it's hard to believe that this year is almost over and it's about to be
Right.
2019. So my first one is, what is your New Year's resolution? And then after that one, what is your ultimate goal?
Yeah, those are great questions. And the fourth quarter is when I usually spend a lot of time retreating and thinking about what do I want to do differently for the upcoming year? What are some new goals or some existing goals that I want to evolve? And so I'm still kind of in that process. But from a New Year's resolution standpoint, it sounds kind of cliche-ish, but I think that whatever I endeavor to do, I want to elevate excellence. So whether that means in my parenting skills, again, I'm getting to the point now to where we have little people in our home, little grown people.
Mm-hmm.
I have a
Yeah.
daughter that's a freshman in college, and now it's not about really being her mom, it's about being a coach to her. Being a sounding board to her, but allowing her to make her own decisions in a way where she's, getting perspective, but then she's using her own brain power to reach conclusions on her own. And that's a slightly different type of relationship than a mother of like a young child, a young daughter. And the same for my son. He's a junior in high school, but he is slowly but surely starting to find his way as well. So, elevating excellence for me as a wife, for me as a parent, for me as a business leader, for me as a community advocate and leader, just whatever I identify as important touch points for me to align myself with. I want to make sure that I'm not just doing it, but I'm doing it in a very intentional way that allows me to gain impact. There's a difference between activity versus impact, and I talk about that a lot, even have a white paper on it. And so that requires a great deal of drive to want to take it to the next level. I celebrate success, but I only stay there for a period of time, because then I'm always like, it's on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so my New Year's resolutions continue to elevate excellence in anything that I put my hands and heart to. And I would say, what are my goals? I do want to diversify my clientele a little bit more from a business perspective. I released my second book this year, so I don't have any desires to, in 2019, to author another book, maybe some additional white papers and articles, of course. But, we have goals within our foundation to want to impact more lives. And so we're slowly but surely working on ways in which we can effectively do that. But generally speaking, it's just to have greater impact. That's not just touching, my immediate family, but that's touching the masses, and really making a difference in that regard.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. White. I really appreciate the opportunity to come sit with you.
Sure.
I'm glad we could finally sit down once
Absolutely.
again.
I appreciate your interest in wanting to connect.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
thank you.
I just love reaching out to people, and I'm still in the early stages of my career, and I just love to like sit down with other entrepreneurs and just soak up all the knowledge. Before we get out of here, do you have any social media that you want to give out so people can find you, or any advice you want to give out at all?
Yes, I think the best way for me to, because I'm on just about every social media platform, so the best way is to direct people to my website, which is nikawhite.com. Very simple, my name.com, and it's Nika White, just like the color. And on my website, there are direct links to follow me on all of my social media platforms: Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. So I look forward to connecting with anyone that would love to be a part of my network.
All right, and there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, this is the Cross the Line Podcast. Keep chasing dreams. Thank you for listening.